Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from somewhere outside in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. And I really appreciate you listening. This is a little special intro, recording at night under the stars. And you may hear a little cricket and frog noise in the background or not. I also want to thank Brent Smith for your donation to help make this podcast possible. It means a lot. And if you're listening and you'd like to help get the word out about how wine can be an ecological and regenerative solution to some of our biggest problems, please send a donation through Venmo to @Centralis. That's @CENTRALAS. It's associated with my name, Adam Huss, and your contribution goes directly to covering the costs of the many hours and real production expenses behind every episode of the Organic Wine Podcast. So thank you. My guest for this special episode is Kelly Mulville. Now, Kelly is not in upstate New York, but Kelly's life has been guided by an awe and respect for the natural world and a deep appreciation for its beauty. This led him to want to learn how to farm in a way that protected or enhanced the natural world and made him a better listener and observer of what made ecosystems work. Through his years of farming, he has attempted to answer the question of how we can turn agriculture from one of the most destructive forces on the planet into the method that we can use to repair the damage and restore biodiversity and health to ecosystems. Kelly's journey has led him to test various kinds of grazing-based viticulture in many contexts throughout the West and Southwest U.S., and to ultimately build a vineyard system that incorporates animals year-round in Central California at Paicines Ranch. The work he is doing is laying the foundation for what I think will be the future of viticulture, and Kelly lays out the vision and principles that guide it. Kelly is working with vinifera that he basically doesn't have to spray because of the systems he has implemented and his attention to soil health, biodiversity, and amazing new findings around sap bricks analysis that is revolutionizing our understanding of how we can prevent insect pest issues. We get into the details of the Watson trellising system that he now uses to create a kind of vine forest rather than a vineyard, as well as how to potentially integrate sheep year-round into an existing VSP trellis system. We get into ground squirrel management, the ecology of birds in viticulture and agricultural systems, and the amazing return of an endangered species for which his vineyard is helping to provide desirable habitat. If you haven't heard of Kelly Mulville or the work that he's doing at Paicines Ranch, this is potentially revolutionary stuff. I could not be more impressed with Kelly's humble, passionate, and compassionate approach to viticulture. He grounds everything he does in science and real, detailed data because he sees everything he has accomplished so far as just the beginning. And he wants others to be able to learn from and build upon his work to do even better. Enjoy. Kelly, welcome. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I'm just going to start with a little something. I've been listening to your voice recently, and has anyone ever told you sound like Clint Eastwood?
I hear it all the time, and I also hear that I look like him.
Yeah, that as well. Well, I think that's how I'll introduce you then. When I do the introduction for this, my my interview today is with Clint Eastwood, and nobody will know the difference. I'll just cut out this part where I said your name, and we'll take it from there. uh, in his later years, Clint has become an expert in grazing-based viticulture,
Yeah,
and is
yeah.
here to
I
share
finally
his
started doing
wealth of
something
knowledge.
worthwhile.
Exactly. Um, well, okay. So let's talk about who you really are and how how you ended up there. I am. There's so many great things that you are an expert in, and I wonder if you could just give us a sense of how where you are and how you sort of got there in a brief big picture sort of way.
Yeah, so I grew up in El Paso, Texas, kind of on the edge of El Paso, and um, at a young age I got uh, really into chili farming,
Mm.
and which is interesting because it is also very terroir based. And during my spell of growing chilies, and we had a little farm stand where we sold stuff from our kind of a family market farm. I during that time, I also got, well, actually, even before chilies, I got into raptors and falconry. And it
Mm,
was actually my delving into falconry and starting to raise hawks when I was 11 that I realized and got into, the whole thing that was going on with declining raptor numbers and DDT and all that stuff. I read Silent Spring and was pretty devastated. I've been depressed ever
hmm.
since, basically. And
Yeah, the poisons have changed, but the practices haven't in a
uh,
lot of ways.
Yeah. So that spurred me to realizing that agriculture was a big problem for the raptors declining and a lot
Mm,
of other stuff. And so the type of agriculture that was most common, and so that got me into organic uh, farming, and
mm.
which eventually led me to California to go to the farm and garden program at UC Santa Cruz.
Can
And
I just want to I want to pause you at UC Santa Cruz Farm and Garden Program and
okay.
say this is unique. I'm just realizing this as you're saying this, but I think a lot of people get into organics for self-oriented reasons, and and I think it's kind of remarkable that it was your compassion and empathy for the beauty of these creatures that you were fascinated with that actually ma- heightened your awareness. That's actually really interesting. I mean, that's a that's a big compliment to your character, and and I most people are concerned about what they're putting into their bodies, or their maybe it's not pure self interest. They're concerned about their family, but I think this is such a beautiful way to get into caring about these things. I just wanted to throw that out there. Feel free to comment or continue.
Well, I was just going to say that's the biggest driver in my life is just kind of this. Um, I guess compassion is one level, but in another sense, it's just complete awe of the natural world
Mm,
and immense respect and gratitude for that.
yeah,
So that's
that's
kind of been driving just about everything I've done since I was a kid.
Well, I mean, I personally, you probably wouldn't say this, but I think that's so. I mean, maybe you would say this in a philosophical sense, but not about yourself. But I mean, I think it's so important to what you've accomplished that you approached it that way, because I think it's made you probably a better listener, a better observer of the natural world, to see what works and what systems integrate better with it because of that awe and respect and yeah, just love of that. That's I think that's so important. I mean, we can end now, and you've done your job just by living by example that way. But please don't end. Let's. Okay, so you're at UC Santa Cruz.
Yep, at UC Santa Cruz. Mainly because I thought I was a pretty good organic farmer, and I had a big crop failure one year, and so I decided. And that was really
Mm,
at that time. That was so I was there in '83, and at that time that was really the only place to go to kind of get a hands-on learning experience in organic. It was called French Intensive Biodynamic
mm,
Agriculture then, and so. The funny thing is, I had no interest in wine at that time,
yeah.
and but I left there and then was on a ranch in Colorado working, and a friend of mine who I had gone to high school with and whose ranch I had also worked on showed me an article about Alan Savory and holistic management, and that just really clicked what I was learning about him. And he had just come to the United States like a couple of years earlier, and so my mode of transportation at that time was a bicycle. And so at the end of the season, I hopped on my bike and rode down to Albuquerque and knocked on his door and said, "Hey, I want to learn more about this." And so spent basically, I don't know, 3 hours with him just going over stuff and asking, where can I learn? This is really what it's about for me, is how do we restore ecosystems? And so he offered me a scholarship to his course, probably based on my mode of transportation. And, and so I went to a class, and after that class, I said, "Okay, Alan, I can't learn this at any university in this country because they're all trying to hang you. So, what if you put together some type of more in-depth learning program for those of us who want to do a deep dive into this. And he ended up putting together a degree program, which then became the Certified Educators Program, which is the Certified Educators Program is still going on. Um, so I went through that while I was working at a ranch and working with ranchers, and was just really impressed by how they were restoring ecosystems with livestock. I
Mhm.
joke that I spent my early years chasing livestock out of my market farm, and I'm spending all my adult life trying to get animals back in. So those were the big influences, some of the bigger influences, and then also my father was an architect, and so everything in our life was designed for better or worse. And just this whole idea of how do we design systems, because we have no design in agriculture. You can get a PhD in agricultural engineering, and as far as I know, there is not a single design class offered at any agricultural university or any university for that matter, which is really phenomenal to think that's the way that we interact. The main impact and the main way we interact with the natural world is through agriculture, and
Mm.
we have no sense, no concept of designing to work with agriculture.
Now, what did you do in the absence of that? How did you begin to approach what you began to pursue, and what problems did you like? What are the problems that we need to solve? I guess on a bigger scale, and with a look at our agriculture to make it a more ecological agricultural design.
It's funny because for a while I was a vegetarian just because of all the damage I was seeing on rangelands through livestock. And this was when I was
Mm.
like a teenager. And so it was ironic that when I came across Savory, he was actually doing what Aldo Leopold talked about years before and saying that we might very well end up using the same tools and tools and practices that have compromised the ecosystem to restore it.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, that's exactly what Savory was doing. He was using the tool of livestock, which he at one point in Rhodesia, he had said um, that he wanted to shoot every cow in the country and any rancher that stood in his way because ecosystems had to be restored and cattle were the problem. He realized that thinking was wrong, and that really
Mm.
what we needed to look at is how do we mimic nature, and perhaps cattle can be a tool in doing that, livestock can be a tool in doing that. And so, kind of back to your initial point there, how did I go about bringing design thinking into agricultural practices was in a large part due to the to the decision making framework that Savory put together in holistic management, and having a framework that is taking ecosystem processes into consideration, things like water cycle, mineral cycle, uh, those aspects of that are universal to the ecosystem, uh, and looking at those when you create a context of what you're trying to do. And so basically uh, putting the ecosystem first, because we have not been doing that and we've gotten into a lot of trouble with that. And unfortunately, I think our culture, we have to we have to do that. I think a lot of indigenous cultures, that was just the way they did things. They were so tied into the ecosystem that it wasn't like something you had to stand back and say, "Oh, well, we should be considering, the effect on other forms of life." And so we're in like this
Hmm.
reverse pattern of trying to figure out how to live on this planet and take care of it. And so
Yeah.
there's and it's funny when you refer to me as an expert. I don't consider myself an expert in anything, and but it's just this learning process that a lot of us are going through and
You
saying,
you failed
okay,
at it more than the rest of us have. That's all I mean. Is that
exactly. And I am an expert at failing at stuff, I would say. But occasionally you find something that works. So, yeah.
I love that. Well, when did wine enter your life, and how did it?
A wine entered my life. uh, to backtrack a little bit, my parents had a winemaking class at our house when I was a kid. And I had no interest in it. I had no interest in it until I was about 35 years old, and I was living at 10,000 feet in Colorado. Friends had a restaurant that was a tiny restaurant that was getting rave reviews, and except, and I just heard this recently in visiting them. They said, "Yeah, we're getting all these great reviews," except someone was finally honest, and they said that their wine list was insipid. So they decided to invite some friends over. So this was only open seasonally and during the summer. It wasn't a ski town or anything. So it was just
Oh,
it
yeah.
was the busy time was summer, and they invited some locals over to go through a wine tasting and write notes, and so that they could develop their wine list based off of other people's ideas. And that was the first time I'd gone through and tasted wine, and was just blown away by how good
Mm.
some of it could be and how varied it could be. And within probably like less than 2 years of that, I was putting in a vineyard, never having put in a vineyard before. So
Wow. Where
it was
in Colorado?
no, that was the
Oh,
vineyard the first vineyard I put in was in at the edge of the Chihuahuan Desert in southeast Arizona.
oh, a Wilcox area?
Um, Over the hill from Wilcox in the Chiricahua
Okay.
Mountains.
Wow. Fantastic.
And I
Okay.
think
Was
it's
there
still
anything
the
else
only
there? Were there any other vineyards
no,
nearby?
and I think it's still the only vineyard there. It was surrounded by national forest
Wow.
and pretty remote. Yeah.
Well, this is why you said it is possible to grow grapes well in a monsoon climate.
Yes. Yes.
You have experience.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I lived in Breckenridge for a time at 10,000 feet. So it's a fun experience when you get acclimated to that and then come down to the lowlands and feel like you can do anything and drink anything too, it seems like.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had that experience, but you ended up in California eventually, right? I mean,
Yes.
was the you weren't combining livestock in in Arizona, did you?
That was my first attempt at integrating animals into domestic animals into a vineyard. The
Oh,
place
okay.
is famous for the because it has some of the most biodiversity in the lower 48. Um, you have everything from kind of desert, for instance, just in botanically speaking, you have everything from cactus to tropical, subtropical plants there, and same with birds. You have an incredible diversity of birds, including trogons. There used to be a large population of small-billed parrots in that area, and so it's a pretty phenomenal area. Jaguar. So that first vineyard I put in, I actually had to put in an electric fence to keep out bear. That's where the state dropped off all their problem bears that were raiding campsites, and so they had no fear of people. So I knew that that would be a problem I would have to deal with before it came. But we also had we had mountain lion, jaguar, peccaries, um, ringtail cats, cotamundis, which are kind of like a cross between a raccoon and a monkey. It was just phenomenal, and then the amount of
Wow.
birds and everything was there. So it was a biological wonderland, and I was trying to keep out the larger animals that would eat grapes.
The peccaries are little pig-like things, right?
Right, they're also known as javelinas.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if they were separate from. I was going to ask if that was if you have two species there, but so that it's just a different name. Got it. All right. And what were you integrating into that vineyard? Was it sheep in there?
So no, it was not sheep. It was an apple orchard before I turned it into a vineyard, and the I had neighbors that actually they they taught at a Mennonite college, and they had a group of students for a like a like a short course on ecological and social issues in the Southwest, and they ended up that class ended up helping me plant that vineyard, which was great because there was there was nobody around. but
There's
um,
no labor force
but
in the middle of nowhere.
they ran a cattle ranch for her brother, and so I said, "Hey, I would like to put some cattle in here." And that attempt was to put cattle in before planting to start cycling nutrients and getting some dung and urine in there. And we
Okay.
put the cattle in, and they were we opened the trailer and put them into a gate, and they ran through the vineyard wiped out a lot of the trellis posts I'd installed, and went through a 13 wire, 10,000-volt electric fence, and we didn't see him again for about 2 weeks. So, that was my first introduction into trying to put animals into a vineyard. Um,
Was that your last time with that large of an animal, or did you
it
try
was it was
again?
my last it was the last time trying to put cattle who had hardly seen people into into a vineyard.
Right, right. Right, let's go round up some bison, some and
Yeah, yeah,
see how that works. Yeah. Well, fun. So a big learning experience. I mean, that sounds like a magical vineyard place situation. That sounds incredible.
yeah. It really
First of
is.
all,
Yeah, one of
is
my
it still
favorite
going
spots.
on?
It is. It
Fantastic.
ended up being sold,
Okay.
and they're still making wine from there. And I was looking it up one time to uh, see if anything was going on, and a wine reviewer said that he thought that the Counoise coming from that vineyard was the best wine in Arizona. Um,
Wow.
and I have actually not had a chance to try that, which I would like to do that.
Nice. Okay, so I mean, we could probably jump ahead to where are you now?
Yeah, so I'm at Paicines Ranch in San Benito County, California, and
Sort of north central coast.
it is it is kind of north central coast. We're directly east of Salinas. It's just over the
Okay.
hill from us, and we are
So,
south of Hollister. Probably one of the most famous vineyards in our neighborhood is Calera, um,
mhm.
but we also have Eden Rift on the other side of us, and
Yep.
um, Enns Vineyard, which is one of
Uh-huh.
the oldest producing vineyards in the state. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so was actually the second AVA to be established in California, so it has a long history of growing grapes.
Wow. So did you find them or did they find you? I mean, because essentially the Piscinus Ranch owners gave you a pretty amazing canvas to work your to do your art on, I think. If
Uh,
if that analogy applies.
yeah, they did. And what happened was, I when I was here before working. I worked a couple of vineyards in California, all of which I had integrated sheep in, and this was starting in about 2005. And um, the during that time, early in my involvement with holistic management, a group put together something called the Quivera Coalition, which was a attempt to get ranchers and environmentalists to work together. And they started
Mm,
putting on a conference every year, and that conference is still going on. It's called the Regenerate Conference. And at one of those conferences, I had run across Sally maybe once or twice, the owner of Paicines Ranch in California, but we didn't really know each other very well. But she was at that conference, I was at that conference, and uh, a range management consultant from Australia, who was a mutual friend of both of ours, was also there, and she got us together and said, "Sally wants to put in a vineyard in at her ranch." And I told her not to do anything until she talks to you.
mm.
And I was about to do a presentation at Eco Farm, the first presentation I did in California on this idea. And I knew Sally's Ranch was fairly close to Monterey, which is where the Eco Farm conference is every year. And I said, Sally, why don't you come to this conference and 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 listen to what I'm working on? And if it's of interest to you, then we can talk further. But if it's not, we won't waste each other's time. And so she came to that, and afterwards she said, "You need to come to my ranch as soon as possible because now I'm not sure that I can even just do an organic vineyard." And so I
Right.
came out and we talked, and we kind of went back and forth for about a year and a half, and finally she talked us into coming out here. My wife and I were living back in Colorado and farming vegetables at high altitude, also integrating livestock with that operation, and we're considering staying there. But she talked us out of that, and we've been here ever since then.
And did you have a trial in California before working on the Paisanos Ranch?
I did, and so this is
No.
backtracking a little bit.
And
I've
that
got
was that the basis of your presentation that she saw as well?
um, so yes, and so
Okay.
that was based off of a trial I did in Sonoma County, which is the first place where I integrated. Where and thinking about this and looking at how the ecosystems work in the places where I'd grown grapes, which was in uh, monsoonal areas of the Southwest, and then in Mediterranean climates in California, you get either you get your rains in the summer or you get your rains in the winter and spring, and either way, um, your growth of your peak growth of your vegetation, whether it's cover crop or natural vegetation, is kind of occurring either in late spring in or early to late spring in Mediterranean climates, or it's occurring in summer in monsoonal climates. And so I realized that if you really want to cycle those nutrients and take advantage of that vegetation in a vineyard situation, you need to have the animals in there when the vines are growing. And
Right.
so the challenge is figuring out how you get animals in those vineyards during that time. And my
How to have
first
them
thought,
eat the grass but not the grapes kind of thing.
right, right. My first thought was I was managing this small biodynamic vineyard in the Alexander Valley, and I talked to the owner and I said, "Hey, are you okay if I put some electric wires in here and try this idea of grazing the vineyard during the growing season?" She said, "Yeah, sure." And so I did that, and kind of thought about where to place the wires because I wanted them to do the suckering for me. I wanted them to do the obviously browse the vineyard floor, but I also then wanted anything that from the top that came and kind of draped over to be fair game for them to tip. So
Mm.
I set this up, and much to my surprise, it worked flawlessly. And it was great because it was this was a small vineyard taken out of a like a 60-acre vineyard. And so I had a great control site that was managed conventionally on the other side. And
Ah,
so the first year I managed it without sheep at all. The second year it was just the kind of the standard winter grazing program that's done with a fair number of vineyards now. And then the final year, that was the extended season grazing until about the end of June. And at the end of that, I ended up writing an article on the benefits that happened from that. And it was rejected
mm.
by every viticulture magazine in this country. And it was picked up immediately by Australian New Zealand grape grower winemaker. And
Well, God
because
bless
of that,
Australia, New Zealand.
yeah, because of that, I was invited to do presentations in both of those countries. And the first commercial vineyard to adopt that offset system is Insay Vineyard in Insay, Victoria, and they're still using that. And they've been on it now for over 10 years. I think it's been really good for them. I check in with them every couple of years and never had any complaints. So, and it's pretty much featured on their website. It's kind of the first thing that they talk about.
Yeah, it's. I mean, well, several things I wanted to just jump in real quick. I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe who knows why they did that for other reasons, but sheep are a much bigger part of the culture in Australia, New Zealand. I mean, I know. Yeah, like in terms of population of people versus sheep in New Zealand, the sheep far outnumber the people as far as I last census count I heard.
Yeah,
Um, and I'm also like really impressed that you were able to just go into an existing vineyard. And this is, I mean, I think really encouraging for somebody who is considering this but not sure how they would do it since they have an existing vineyard. But the fact that you were able to run, was it one wire on each side of sort of the growing region? Is that what you did in that trial
right.
region? One electric wire. So, and
Yeah,
that pretty much took care of what, and it was otherwise a VSP system.
correct.
Great. And so, I mean, just anybody listening, uh, there was a success that could be replicated in, most vineyards in California, it sounds like.
And many vineyards. One of the
Yeah, many.
oftentimes,
Yeah.
yeah, oftentimes the limiting factor is we've gotten this infatuation with tight row spacing, and where to the point where your tractor barely has any wiggle room, and to have these offsets in there means that you're going to lose probably about a foot and a half. Um,
Ah, okay.
but
So it
which
works better
which
with like 8 foot rows or more.
yeah, yeah.
Got it.
Um, So that's yeah. So that's whenever I'm working with somebody who's interested in that, that's the first question I say. Well, what's your row spacing, and how much wiggle room do you have with your tractor? And
Got it.
hopefully soon that won't be an issue because we'll be able to spray with drones. But we're
Right.
we're we're not quite there yet. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
it is completely possible. And the so some of the benefits that I discovered just in that first year, and this is to me one of the most profound ones. One is a dramatic decrease in water use, and we
Huh.
actually had a 90% decrease in water use and about a 1,300 pound per acre increase in yield
That's
simultaneous.
incredible. I mean, that's incredible, especially right now in history.
Yeah.
That is so crucial. Wow. Okay.
And that's why
Uh,
Australia and New Zealand said they picked up the article right away. They said that we've been dealing with climate change forever, and
mm,
well, they've been dealing with it for a long time. And
yeah.
they, so she said we're just a lot more open to possibilities. So
Huh.
that was, and it took me going down there before I got invited to speak over here.
Internationally famous, locally obscure.
Yeah,
uh, well, and all this background is, I think, really important for everybody to hear because I think what it builds to is what you implemented at Paicines Ranch. Because in a lot of ways, it is taking from all of the learning experiences that you had and rebuilding a system from the ground up with this ecological perspective on how to do a perennial crop integrated with year-round grazing, and everything else. And before I jump into that, because I want to get into that, but just for anybody listening, if you are trying to be certified organic, is there any issue with keeping your sheep year-round in the vineyard or whatever animal?
so that was an issue. And I one of the first vineyards that I was grazing was when I started there. They were just about to become certified organic, and so during that kind of final review of stuff, I had asked the certifier. I told her that I was interested in running sheep throughout the growing season, and she said, "Oh, that's not going to be very likely, but I'll listen to you." And so
Huh.
I told her why I wanted to do that. I just felt there was going to be numerous benefits, many of which I didn't even know about at that time. And and I said, and furthermore, I don't know if there's a case of human pathogens surviving alcoholic fermentation and being a problem in wine.
Yeah.
And so she actually went back to CCOF and had their basically kind of reinterpreted the rulings and made it okay for me to do that, or for vineyards to do that.
Wow.
And
Is that now a precedent that could be used for
uh,
others? Or
well,
was that
it seems to be. So that was with CCOF,
okay?
and
That's
when
California's organic
right,
certifier.
right, which I think is the largest organic certifier in the United States. I'm not sure about that, but
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah.
but when I was in New Zealand, I some folks from a vineyard after I gave my presentation said that they couldn't sell their wine in America as organic, even though they're certified in New Zealand, because they did leaf pulling in the summer with sheep, which amounts to running them through the vineyard quickly, because you just want them to do a little bit of leaf removal and then get them out of there. And
Right.
they couldn't, they weren't qualified for certification. I had them contact CCOF, and I think almost before I got back from that trip, they were approved. And so
Wow.
I would say that that is somewhat of a precedent.
Wow. Fantastic. Well,
And
I
just
mean,
to, for the record, the person who I was working with in that um, is now the person running the regenerative organic certification. So
oh, that's
Elizabeth
yeah.
Elizabeth
Okay.
Whitlow.
Whitlow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. I interviewed her. There's a great podcast with her about the Regenerative Organic Alliance and certification. So, yeah. If anybody's listening, check that one out. She's amazing and great and good.
Yeah,
Makes me respect her even more that she was able to do that, make that happen.
yeah, she's
I mean, that in
fantastic.
itself is a legacy. Well done, Elizabeth. I'm just thinking. Well, let's just jump back to you being at Paicines and what that looks like now. So, what maybe the way that I want to go is what is the vision that you had, or what are the principles that you were trying to accomplish and achieve with this system that you built uh, at Paicines, and then we could get into the details of what it looks like, but I'd love you to sort of talk about your vision, whether like your deep core values, as well as the sort of the ecological design principles, and just overall perspective on nature and our interaction with it that informed what you did there.
So the big overarching um, vision, kind of for all of the agriculture that I've been working on, has been, if we stand back and look at agriculture, it's probably one of the single most destructive things humans have ever implemented. And it's this process where we take an ecosystem and make it pretty much devoid of biodiversity, and then proceed to reduce the soil health until it can no longer be farmed. And so that's not even, much less sustainable. It's not even sane.
Yeah.
And so but and so we've been able to prop this up with chemicals, and which is basically, it's the it's a we're on this life support system that is that it can keep something alive, but it's not restoring its health. So the big question is, can we reverse this? Can we actually use agriculture as a process to restore biodiversity to the planet? And that is the big question that has been driving me. And so that is the goal of this experiment at Paicines is, can we do that? That's the big question. And if so, how do we do that? And so I really appreciate that you asked about principles, because we're working with a number of principles. And if on the Paicines Ranch website, you can find those. But a lot of those are also the same principles that folks working in the realm of soil health are using, which is and basically to keep the soil covered throughout the year, to keep diversity high, keep living roots in the soil as much as possible, um, have a context, in other words, have a vision, integrate livestock. And so there's the list kind of goes on, and all of these things are pretty basic. Um, the one that we often don't get to is integrating livestock. And here at Piscinus, my goal is actually to get beyond livestock as a tool to restore ecosystems, but I don't want livestock to be the focus. Um, it's great because it also allows another revenue stream. But really,
Right.
what I want to do is not see how many farm animals I can have on this place, but to see how much biodiversity that is native to this spot, how much of that we can get to return. And so that includes birds, insects, all kinds of animals, and microbiology. So that's the big picture thing, is how do we actually increase the productivity and the resiliency, and just the health, the inherent health of a piece of land through our practices.
You're steeped in. I know you mentioned sort of a biological, agricultural education at one point, and I'm just this inclusion of diversity sounds also sort of like a permaculture principle. It's sort of echoing some of these things. Do you, are you pulling from all these different ways as you build this stuff, or are these things that sort of transcend all agriculture and really have been handed down from nature originally?
Yeah, I think ultimately that we're just trying to to figure out how to work with nature, what the principles of nature are, and how we can first stay out of the way, and then second, maybe even participate in a way that allows the nature to express itself again in these areas, which is basically the majority of the world now that we've damaged.
Yeah.
And so there's and you know, I am by no means the first person to think about this, and there's a lot of people who have been talking about this for a while now, basically since contemporary agriculture began. There's been people saying, "Wait a minute, this some of this stuff doesn't seem right," and so I will. I've definitely been influenced by people like Alan Savory. I have not really delved that much into permaculture, but I've really a lot of writers like Aldo Leopold, um, uh, Masanobu
Like,
Fukuoka, people
mm,
like that. I've been paying attention to, and then interestingly enough, I've gone out of the realm of viticulture. It was in ranching where I got a lot of my experiences and realizations that you can restore ecosystems through by mimicking the way nature functions. When
yeah.
we've removed that ability for nature to function as a whole, if we start mimicking that process, even if we're not using the native animals there, then we can still restore things. And for me, the ultimate idea is not how do we take over the natural world with domestic animals. It's how do we return as much of that natural world to the other species that have just as much a right and need to be here as we do.
Yeah, that's I wasn't going to ask this, but you've just brought it up a couple times about how, humans were trying to do no harm first. But, I often think that we humans get a bad rap, and it's based on our recent performance in relationship with nature. But I feel like prior to, the last, couple hundred years, we did a pretty good job. Like we were pretty well integrated. And it sounds like, I guess my question for you is, is that something you're conscious of as you think about these things, that we really do have this, has it made you more conscious of our capacity to actually be a force for good in relationship with nature, like that our that we, as part of nature, that once we get in tune with it, we actually can do we can do immense good. We can do things very quickly in a positive way. I don't
Um,
know.
yeah, it, and until probably this year, I was still wondering if we actually can
Mm,
in viticulture situations. I've seen this in rangeland situations, but in
okay.
viticulture in particular, I still question it deeply. And the big moment this year for me and my crew, we run an internship program here, and happened when this summer I ask people, I remind them to pay attention to sounds, to especially bird sounds, but also insects,
Mm,
and because that's such an important part of our sensory our sensory perception of the natural world, and so they were paying attention to the bird sounds, and one day I got a text and it said there's a really interesting sounding bird here, and I just responded back and said, does it sound like a cat? And they said, yeah. And I said, I'll be right up. So that bird is a tricolored blackbird, which is
mm,
indigenous to California. It looks a lot like a red-winged blackbird. It's a colonizing bird, so they live in big colonies. Kind of the other colonizing bird that we had in this country was the passenger pigeon, and
huh,
the tricolored blackbird is well on its way to becoming a historical relic like the passenger pigeon. Its numbers have dropped dramatically in the state, primarily due to agricultural practices. And so we would get a couple here and there, and you would hear this funny sound. And so each day were seeing a couple more. And finally, one day I called up our local bird guide, who had told me at one point, she said, we might be able to get a few more tricolored blackbirds here if we pay attention and manage well. And I called her up and I said, hey, we have what seems like I don't know, a couple hundred tricolors in a flock here. And she said, you probably just don't know how to count birds. And I said, well, maybe so, but come out here and check it for yourself. And she came out and she said, "Oh my God, you have like at least 800, and
Wow.
this is crazy." And so about the same time, Fish and Game came to look at a pond we have down kind of below the vineyard, and they were looking for red-legged frogs. Unfortunately, one of the guys in that group had spent time in the Central Valley and knew about tricolored blackbirds, and he heard them, and he said, "We can't go in there. They could possibly be nesting here." And he said, "But what is back there where they're all flying?" And the guy that was with him said, "The vineyard." And he said, "You must have a lot of insects in the vineyard." And he said, "Yeah, actually, we're monitoring that, and we do." And so, anyway, um, it was an incredible display every day, having this huge flock of tricolored blackbirds come in. In the morning, they would spend around the outside of the vineyard, and they would land on the ground, and then the birds in the back would fly over the birds in the front, and they kept this rolling thing going on, I guess, which would bring up insects. And then in the
Mm,
afternoon, they'd be in the vineyard, and they'd be doing less of that rolling thing and kind of this broader um, hunting pattern. And
huh.
so I, I, I can't even really express how good that felt to have a bird that was basically declining everywhere else, that had decided that this vineyard was suitable. And according to the local bird guides, he told me the whole process about how the males come. They have to find a spot and they have to prove to the female that it is a good spot for food and to nest. And by the way, I think it's like a ratio of 5 or 6 males to every female. And so
Wow.
they deemed this place worthy, and they successfully nested just down below at this little pond.
That's
So
amazing.
that was to me just a really exciting indicator that we were on the right track. I mean, we're monitoring bird populations, insects, soil, all of these things, and we're getting really positive results from all of that. And to me, that's kind of what my definition of regenerative agriculture is. It's not really what your certifying agent organization is, and what you say you're doing, or what the score of your wine is, or whatever. It's what is actually occurring on the land. And
Mm,
so the vineyard now is a eBird hotspot, and eBird is a online thing put together by Cornell University, and a lot of birders use that to track their own birds that they're watching, but to see where other birds are. And so that's now a
amazing.
hotspot, and we have people that will come and stay at the ranch just to go birding out in the vineyard. and and so we actually have, it's kind of like a citizen science thing happening of monitoring our birds, and then we have a number of other things we have going on for monitoring plants, insects, and soil biology. So those are all things we're tracking because we think we're doing the right thing, but we want to, and we're also doing comparisons to neighboring vineyards. We think we're doing the right thing, and we want to just have some verification that that is true.
Yeah, since you are pioneering a lot of the viability of this, I think it's really important to be able to show that data for others who will come behind and or want to actually, yeah, it might debate its efficacy, to have that. And presumably all of those numbers are on the rise, from what you've said, in
Yeah,
terms of the
the
count
exciting,
of the diversity. Go
yeah.
ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say the exciting one is one of the exciting ones is the soil carbon went up by probably a little over 1% before we even planted the vineyard. And that's because we implemented these basically ecological restoration practices of managing livestock in a way that they mimic native herbivores. And so we were able to get some pretty profound um, healing and building of soil happening even before we planted. So that's, and then yeah, plant species numbers are going up every year. Insect numbers seem very good. That was the one area where we hired somebody to come in and do insect monitoring for us. But one of the things that we did learn from an entomologist, the guy who started Ecdysis, which is a organization researching regenerative agriculture all over the country now. And John Lundgren, the founder, is a PhD entomologist. And I said, what do we look for to just as farmers to know that we have a good insect population? He said, look for spiders. If you have a
Yeah, yeah.
good spider population, you have a good insect population. And
Mm,
so one of the things that we're having to do this year, and it took us a while to figure this out, but we're having to put insect caps on all of our drip emitters. And we're doing that because we found out that we're getting spiders that were going inside the beaks of the drip emitters, and they were living in those, but they were also laying their eggs in there, and that was clogging up those emitters. And
huh.
so I thought, well, if you're going to have a problem, having one that is indicating that you're on the right track, we'll deal with that. We'll put up 30,000 insect caps or whatever we have to
Yeah,
do.
exactly. It's a pain in the butt, but I guess it's a good problem to have.
Yeah,
um, it's. I just want to go back to the birds, and so much of what you said about that and how meaningful that is to you resonates with me. I recently was at a wine tasting. I mean, I was pouring our wine at a wine tasting that was hosted by one of the an ecological landscaping company here in Los Angeles, Viola Gardens, and they after I sort of gave my presentation about the wines and what we do as an ecological winery, they have an in-house ecologist who got up and spoke. And really, the first thing that he did was have us all just start listening. And it was like immediately these things that were just the sort of white noise for our preoccupations suddenly came into focus, and it was and then we began to hear these individual voices of the birds as he called them out and called them out by name, and then could describe, when you hear that, you know that this kind of vegetation is nearby because this is their habitat or this is their food source. And it was like this instant immersion into a three-dimensional perspective on the landscape that we had sort of just felt like we were disconnected from. All of a sudden, it was like we had this ability to see into the forest around us, into the landscape around us, even where we couldn't see, just by paying attention to what we could hear that the birds were telling us. And it seems like this is one of those pieces of knowledge that I think really makes, the natural world magical once you listen to it, once you hear it, and once you understand it, and how reconnecting to that. I mean, it's probably knowledge that we all once had hundreds of years ago, as being more connected to the natural world. And when you have this experience where somebody can sort of explain it to, or like when you start to see these things, when you're telling your people to actually pay attention to these things, and you start to notice these changes happening, it's an amazing thing. It's magical. And I don't know if you've ever read the book Pastoral Song. Have you ever read that?
I have not.
I highly recommend it. It is, and anybody listening, I highly, highly recommend it. It's a beautifully written book by a farmer who is currently farming in the sort of highlands of England, and it is three generations. And it sort of starts with his grandfather, who had like a multi-purpose farm, like a traditional farm that was balanced and diverse and polycultural. And then it went through the Green Revolution and everything that came with that. And the first image that he gives in that, and then it comes to the where we are now seeing the failing of that, and we're actually going back to the like he's now starting to farm like his grandfather farmed, but with the science behind it, like the sort of data that you are collecting as well, to inform the better choices in the way to restore through natural systems. But that the first image of the book is these swallows that follow the plow as they sort of plow the field there, and then how he notices how they disappear, and he listens to their song and watches them, and it becomes the symbol of the health of that system, because there are things that the plow is turning up that the birds want to eat. There are birds that are living there because there's habitat for it. And then they sort of disappeared during the Green Revolution. And now he's starting to see them again in his fields. And that it becomes this framing device. And I just think this paying attention to the birds is something that, I think it's a really great way to get reconnected to what we're doing, what the reason why we're doing what we're doing. It's funny. That's where you started as well, with birds of prey and raptors. And are you doing things like that where you're actively, putting out owl boxes or bird boxes, things like that around the vineyard?
Yes, we have about, I think we have about 60 bluebird swallow boxes. and around the vineyard. And then we have, I don't know, maybe a dozen, 15 owl boxes in the area of the vineyard. We have about 60 owl boxes around the ranch right now. So
Right.
we're the this this kind of the practices that we're doing in the vineyard, we're also doing on the ranch as a whole. So we're using holistic planned grazing throughout the ranch. And the ranch is 7,600 acres, so the vineyard is just a small portion.
It's what, 25-acre vineyard or
It's
how
25
big?
acres, yeah.
25. Yeah.
But
Um,
historically, there used to be 1,000 acres of vineyard on this ranch.
oh, wow.
It used to be
Okay.
part of Almaden, which was 6,000 acres, and I think between 1965 and 1995, it was the largest vineyard in the country and one of the largest in the world.
Wow. Okay. Are there plans to make it that big again, or is it not, or
Not
not?
that big.
Okay. That would be interesting. I'm I, I want to get into some details if that's all right. Ask you
Sure.
some specifics if that's cool. I know. I mean, so since I brought up the bird boxes and you have some raptor boxes, I know that you've had to deal with squirrels, and I'm guessing that you are probably against using poison because of the raptors and the way that that affects downstream ecosystem, impacts. What do you do besides the bird boxes for squirrels, and yeah, how bad of a problem are squirrels?
Yes, squirrels can be pretty severe. We actually the in 2017 was when we planted the vineyard, and we lost a third of all the plantings that first year to squirrels. Um, and so that's so that's when you're trying to increase biodiversity, um,
Yeah.
you get everything. And so
Right.
the uh, the obvious thing is how do we increase our predators, and so like the owl boxes don't address that because the owls are nocturnal and the squirrels are diurnal.
Right.
So we do have a pretty good population of coyotes and
Okay.
bobcats, but the one that is probably the most important is snakes. And
Ah.
interestingly enough, when we planted the vineyard, I had a crew here that was planting, and I had to go do something for a while. And I told them if they saw any snakes, not to kill them, that I would take care of them. And I was doing this all in Spanish, and they misunderstood that to mean that I would kill them. And so when I was
Huh.
gone for just an hour, they ended up killing 13 snakes,
Oh, no.
and most of those were rattlesnakes. And
Uh,
so we've had a we don't kill snakes on the ranch in general, um, and we don't even kill rattlesnakes in the vineyard. In
so is
fact, we
everybody wearing snake boots, Kevlar boots in the vineyard, or is it not that
no,
much of a
no,
problem?
it's not that bad, but you just
Yeah.
pay attention that they're around,
Right. Yeah.
and so and this year was actually another pretty high population of rodents in general, squirrels and gophers,
Uh,
and it was a low population of barn owls. Very few of the boxes did we have nests in. We did have a few, and that seems to be something to do with the drought. We had the owls around, but
hmm.
when they really consume the rodents is when they are feeding nestlings.
Ah,
So,
got it. Yeah.
so really we have not solved or come into balance with the squirrels in a way that I would like to. I'm the main predator right now, and so that's mainly through shooting.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, we don't use poison for them because that would definitely have negative consequences. And we
Yeah.
are in a lead-free zone because we have the California condors here, and I
Yeah.
I wouldn't use lead anyway, being a big fan of raptors. Um,
Yeah.
so so at this point, it's we. I think we still need to get more predators, and the one that I think would probably be the one of the greatest ones is the weasel, which is not protected in
Oh.
California, and occasionally we see a few, but I would really like to get a nice colony of weasels established.
Great idea. Yeah. Well, can you describe? I feel remiss that we haven't talked about how you've trellised the vineyard now. So you are no longer doing the VSP with the electric wires along grow region. You've set up a whole system to rethink how you do this, and I wish you could describe that for.
Sure. And again, this whole process was when I was hired here by Sally. I actually didn't know what kind of trellis system I was going to use. My thought had been to use a completely overhead trellis system, kind of like they use. It's called a DOV system, dried on the vine, that they use for raisins in the Central Valley.
Oh, okay.
And that's a complete overhead system. And
Huh.
I think, well, first let me preface by saying that there are a number of trellis systems that would work for grazing, and we had a couple of the women who are running the Porto Protocol in Portugal were visiting us this past summer.
Uh-huh.
And when they saw our trellis system, they got kind of teary-eyed and reminiscent, and they said, we used to have overhead systems all over Portugal, and now you hardly see them at all. And I said, yeah,
Mm.
and you could have grazed the whole country then.
Right. Right.
But so what I ended up coming across was something called the Watson system, and
Yeah.
this is an elevated V trellis. It looks a lot like a raisin or table grape system, and it is our cordon wire is at about 68 inches, so that's fairly high, and that's where the V starts. That's the bottom of the V. um, and our spacing is 12 feet between rows and 6 feet between vines. This system was originally developed in Texas by a guy named his last name is Watson, and
That
I'm
makes sense.
forgetting I'm forgetting his first name. But
Mr.
um,
Watson.
yeah, Mr. Watson is a retired petroleum engineer, and so he probably had an advantage of being an out of the box thinker. And
Uh-huh.
his vineyard is near Houston, and
Right.
he didn't. As far as I know, nobody else is grazing under the Watson system, but
Okay.
it's predominantly being used in Texas and Georgia. And I first learned about it from my friend Fritz Westover, who's a viticultural consultant and has an online uh, uh, kind of vineyard viticulture academy. And he had he was giving a presentation at a workshop that we were both at. He wasn't there to present, but somebody had canceled out, and so they asked if he could do a quick presentation. And he did one on trellis systems, and he showed that Watson trellis design, and I'd never heard of it before. So I called him up and asked if he thought it would work for grazing, and he said, well, as far as he knew, nobody was using it for that, but he thought it was very possible. Um, so I had him give me names of people that were using that in Texas that he thought were good growers. And my mom lives in San Antonio, so I picked her up and we went traveling around looking at that. And I decided that that's what I was going to use.
Got
So that's what we installed for our trellis system. And it's because the spacing is 4 feet at, per row, the coverage of that V is 4 feet per row. That means that half of the space is under shade, especially during the hot part of the day when the sun is directly overhead. So one of my goals in creating a vineyard from the ground up to restore ecosystem health, increase biodiversity, is how do we create something that is conducive to and kind of mimicking, because this is basically kind of a shrubland, um, when at least at this phase of geological history. And
right.
so I selected a slope facing north because if I'm just looking out the window now, and that's where all the trees are on the slopes facing north. So that's where the perennials, that's where the ecosystem is saying, if you want a perennial, the north slope is the best place for this area to establish.
Great
And
observation. Yeah.
so we selected that site because of that, and we have this plant growing that is a grapevine that isn't normally its native habitat is to grow up a tree, which always surprises me when people say, well, can you get a grapevine to grow that high? And I just remember in Arizona seeing a Vitis arizonica vine growing up at the top of a mountain. There must have been an underground spring there because everything was giant, and I could not see the top of that vine. It was at least 100 feet tall.
Right. Yes.
And
Yeah,
so, yeah,
anybody.
yeah,
Yeah.
vines can grow up at the trellis. And so the great thing about this is that it's growing up. It's easy for picking. It's not so close to the ground that you're getting a heat effect. Not that we would necessarily have that because we keep our soils covered throughout the year, either with dead mulch or living plants. And so
Right,
our soil is much cooler than a soil that's exposed, and that is by practice and design. And then our
right.
vines are up a little bit higher. The wind we track the wind, and the wind generally blows from the same direction. And we set up the rows so that the wind is going up the rows, and so we're getting kind of a cooling effect from that.
Nice.
Furthermore, the fruit has this shaded kind of dappled light, and we can control that by our canopy management and through our pruning. So all of those things can contribute to the effect that we're trying to achieve in the light. And then the vines hang over this trellis system. So they're going up the V, and then they kind of arch down. And when they get into the range of the sheep can do the shoot tipping. So they're doing
Right.
the suckering for us, they're doing the shoot tipping. And as you ask one question, what does this trellis look like? But it leads into how does it function too?
Right, right. Yeah.
And so the sheep are doing the floor, they're doing the floor management. We don't have weeds because we just have a diversity of plants that are growing there, some of which the sheep really like to eat. Some of them are introduced, some of them are native. And we're finding that we're finding about, probably about 6 to a dozen new species each year. Some stuff is kind
Wow.
of wacky. We have a bunch of palm trees that have popped up out there. And the exciting thing is that we're getting a lot of native stuff, especially during the summer. Things like milkweed that are really beneficial to the pollinators
Oh,
and
yeah.
native insect plants. So anyway, you've got this trellis system that is providing shade, that is coming up a bit in elevation, which also makes it beneficial. We're dealing with climate change, not just global warming. We've had
Right.
the last 2 years, we've had frosts in late April, which when I put the
Wow.
vineyard in, the longest standing employee on the vineyard was a Hispanic guy who'd been here for 50 years. And I asked him if we would have frost up there. And he said, you will never have frost up there. And so we've had frost 2 times now. So things are
Wow.
changing. And the vines that were still small, that hadn't gotten up on the trellis, up to the cordon wire, got hit by frost. None of the vines that were up on the trellis system had frost damage, or
Huh.
had any frost damage that was enough to affect the vine in a negative way for like fruit yield or leaf dieback or things like that. So
Wow.
we're getting multiple benefits from that. The folks love to pick in that because they're not stooping down; they're actually picking at about eye level, and
Right.
it works very well for having one person across from another. We're thinking that we could create a kind of a vineyard dating service during harvest because you're across from another person. You don't have you kind of have a somewhat of a screen, so you don't have the uncomfortableness of just looking someone directly, and you
Right,
can
right.
talk freely. And when you get
Can
to
be
the end
like
of the
that.
row, if the person if you didn't jive, then you just switch people.
Yeah, you just it's like speed dating,
Yeah,
row by row. I think that people could pay for harvest for
yeah,
that reason, you know?
that's the idea. Is what people will pay for harvest, and then they can come back here for their wedding because we have a wedding venue.
Right. And so that grow wire is around 66 to 68 inches, I believe. Is that right? Just so
That's
people have
correct.
a okay.
And then
And then
the drip wire is just below that, about a foot below that. So that is also high, which
so it's also high.
enables sheep and animals to go freely in any direction under the vineyard, as well as humans.
Right. You can just duck under easily. And if
Right.
you're
So
short
it's
enough, you don't even
instead
have
of
to
being
duck.
yeah. So instead of being stuck in this particular row, which sheep don't really dig that too much, having to
Yeah.
and they will try and break through and often mess up irrigation systems and stuff doing that.
Yeah.
So having it open like that, all of a sudden, even though by visually looking at it, it's linear in the way it's set up, it's not linear in the way that it functions, and that you can you can go in any direction.
It's more like a forest,
Right.
like a vine forest,
Hmm.
where, um, which I just love. So, is there a decrease in yield per acre because of this 12-foot spacing between the rows? And I know it sounds like it's necessary because you have a 4 foot, just with the wires going out with the top V above the grow wire, that you have 2 feet out from that grow wire. And then I'm imagining probably another foot with just draping vines sort of sprawling out beyond that. So you're already losing, 6 feet of that row. So you have basically like a 6 foot row when you have 12-foot spacing.
Hmm.
But are you losing yield
Um, so
per
this year
per
was our
acre? I guess yield. Yeah.
right.
Sorry.
This year was our second crop, so I am not going to be able to accurately answer that question for us here. But I
Yeah.
talked to Fritz about that. We did a joint workshop here talking about this the Watson system and organic vineyard management, and that question was asked and by me first, and then some other folks. And he's actually written an article or co-authored an article on the Watson system, and what they're finding is that it actually outperforms a VSP system by the acre, but it doesn't quite outperform a something like a Geneva double curtain or something like that, which is for really high vigor sites. So what's
Wow.
happening is even though we are so we're at about 605 vines per acre, and a vineyard maybe in Napa is going to be closer to 1,500 vines per acre.
Hmm.
So but what's happening is because it's divided both ways. It is like a VSP, but then you're putting some of the shoots one direction and some the other. And because you're
Right.
doing that, you can actually have more spurs on that cordon than you would in a regular VSP system, and still
Hmm.
maintain better light exposure and air exposure.
Right.
So
I was going to ask about that. Okay. So you can, yeah, it's almost like you can double up on that.
right, so it's so we're expecting that we'll probably be able to get around 3 to possibly, Fritz said, as high as 5 tons to an acre.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a happy amount.
Yeah,
Sounds
I
like
think
an economical amount.
right.
I
I
mean,
think
like an
that
economically feasible amount. Yeah.
right. That would work for us.
Okay. Um, and you're doing some pretty incredible stuff in terms of just I mean, you're farming organically or better than obviously. But in terms of you're not introducing petrochemical, synthetic chemical sprays and pesticides and fungicides. Can you talk about what you are using? And I mean, I heard you talking about using bricks, increasing your bricks level to just avoid ever having to worry about like a glassy wing sharpshooter kind of situation. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Another big inspiration for me in my work has been John Kempf, founded Advancing Ecological Agriculture, and
Yes.
he in listening to some of his work, he was talking about the fact that if you get your bricks up, and I think this was in a podcast interview he did of somebody else, that if you get your bricks up to about 14 or
And this
15,
is sap. Like this is the bricks of the stems, the leaves, that kind of that those
exactly,
bricks, not
yeah,
fruit bricks.
exactly. We're looking at we're taking the leaves and petioles of a grapevine, and we sometimes it takes a pretty heavy duty press to get some sap out of that, and then we're testing what the bricks is of that.
Okay.
And we have found that without grazing, just based on our fertility practices that we do here, um, we've been able to get a bricks as high as 17 or 18.
Okay.
But when we integrate the animals, we've been able to get our bricks as high as 22. And it's
Good
funny
grief.
because last year when we harvested the Grenache, we actually harvested it at 21. So we had a higher bricks
I
in our
was gonna say
sap
you
than
can
we
make
had in our grapes.
you
And
can make wine from your vines if the
yeah,
grapes don't work out.
right, just press everything. But
So anybody buying your grapes should be doing whole cluster. It sounds like keep those stems in. Um, Wow, and does that have you found that that's true, that having this high Brix level in the plant prevents things like glassy wing sharpshooters?
So we've not had any problem with insects. Um,
Wow.
at all. The and that's been kind of nice. And
Huh.
so and we were before before hearing about using the bricks as a means, or monitoring your bricks level as a means of knowing if you might have potential insect problems. We were monitoring bricks in our forage on the ranch because a high bricks also is indicative of high quality forage that is going to be able to put weight on livestock faster,
Right. Right.
and just general quality of the feed. So we actually had a bunch of refractometers on the ranch for livestock crew and for some of the workshops that we do here. So the, started, and it was just last year that we really started paying attention to the bricks and the vines, and we've not had any insect problems. Uh, I did pull off a hornworm in a grow tube a couple days ago, but that was on a young vine, and I suspected it had not didn't have the benefit of being grazed and a couple other things or browsed. So
Got it.
so those types of insects are out there, but the 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 principle behind that is that an insect has a primitive digestive system, and their whole means of being in this world of their sensory perception is geared towards finding plants that are that are basically have low bricks, because they can digest those insects that are going to eat plants. They need stuff that's basically kind of on its way down, and so they have this their visual ability can hone in on those, and so that's one of, and so that's one of the ways that we keep the breaks up is by browsing the vines, and I think that's coming from a couple things. The saliva has been shown to have beneficial properties to allowing a plant to restore. It also may induce a plant response to as like a warning response to cause that plant to produce certain chemicals that would deter something browsing it again.
Right.
And then we also have the nutrient cycling that's occurring from the dung and the urine, which may impart benefits to the grazing animal, but or to the plant. But we still have a lot to learn in that realm. We do know that it appears to be that one component of the saliva is vitamin B1, which I think is thiamine, and that has
Okay.
been found in the saliva of grazing animals, and that might have a little bit of a boost to the immune system of the plant.
Is the Watson system any more expensive than any other trellising system? And how much would you estimate per acre? I mean, do you have those kind of numbers for somebody who's considering starting a vineyard?
Yeah, so I think this is going to vary depending on where you are. And my latest numbers, so we divided the vineyard up into two phases. Each is about 12 and a half acres. And the reason for that is just because we figured we would be coming across things that we hadn't considered that would come up that we might change in the second phase, which was definitely true, and in particular for the trellis system. So the trellis, the cost of the trellis per acre in 2020, just for trellis materials, was about $5,200. And
Okay.
I checked, I recently checked what it costs to put a trellis up, a VSP trellis in Napa, and that cost was closer to 9,000. So this would actually
Mm,
be less expensive, but it only makes sense because you have half the rows
right.
and,
Yeah.
well, close to half the rows and a lot less vines per row. And basically,
Right.
a trellis is just a bunch of posts and wire. And
Right.
so if you're if you're increasing your yield per trellis post, which is what you're doing with the Watson system, then it kind of makes more economic sense.
Huh. That's fascinating. Now you're growing vinifera. I'm pretty sure. Do you
Yes.
think that? I mean, what I know, what little I know about hybrids, they or American native varieties is they tend to be grown on a high wire as well, but it's a single cordon, and it's because unlike vinifera, they don't tend to have vertical growth; they tend to have drapey. Downward growth, and so you start them high and they sort of drape down. It seems like hybrids would be a sort of just a natural integration for this kind of trellis system, and integration where you're doing any kind of grazing based viticulture, because they're already trained high traditionally. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I, I, I do, and I think that I think that it would probably work well. You might want to modify it slightly. You might not
Okay.
need the V might be fine as a with less of a width and having your
Okay.
catch wires a little bit closer together. I've talked to one of my apprentices here. Actually, before she came here, she was in Vermont, and I think she was working with uh, a family who you have done a podcast interview of. Um, and she showed me some pictures from there, and I looked at it and said, well, um, I see that these are drooping down fairly well, so that would be a problem for grazing because they'd be eating those vines. But I think if you just maybe brought in your V a little bit and brought your wires closer together, that it would work really well for that.
Huh. So yeah, because they're not using any V at all, right? The one that
Right,
you saw, I'm
right,
imagining, right? So it's just that top wire cordon, and they let it hang down
right.
naturally. So yeah, so you're saying give it a little lift, but it doesn't need as much as the Watson, like the full 2 feet on either side of the grow wire.
That's my suspicion.
Interesting. All right. Man, this is just such incredible stuff. Thank you so much for all this. I know for anybody that's been listening and is having trouble visualizing this, I highly recommend everybody check out, if you could give the website where people can see these photos for the ranch. I mean, it's all there's some great shots just to wrap your head around what we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's the website is www.paicenesranch.com. And if you go to the vineyard, there is a number of photos. And then there's also some links to some other presentations that I've done. And one of those is a webinar that I did for Green Cover. And so I'm showing some photos on that as well. And then there is a in vineyard interview that was done with Liz Carlisle, who writes a lot on regenerative ag and is a professor at UC Santa Barbara.
Got it. So Paicines ranch.com. Amazing resource. The green cover YouTube video where your talk with green cover is really amazing. Some of the photos, the side by side comparisons are just striking. And yeah, it's very practical. It's a ton of great, sort of PowerPoint style information that people can get from there as well. And I just want to put a plug out there. If anybody is looking for great, local California meat, you guys have a pretty awesome pastured meat shop on the Paicines Ranch website as well, which I wish I discovered sooner, because I would have been shopping there sooner. I don't know. And now, that anybody who's listened to this kind of has gotten to know their farmer pretty well and knows how the holistic system that they're being raised in. This is really exciting stuff. I mean, something to support, and we all want that kind of food in our life anyway. So just throwing that out there. Is there anything else that you want to promote or talk about?
Just that our overall philosophy at the ranch is to be open source, um, and so we are certified organic. But and I think that one of the things that's important to us is that this not just happen here, and that we inspire others, because this is not the only way to do things. And one of the strengths of humans is that we do have this capacity for creativity, and our hope is that others will learn from what we're doing and take their creativity and expand on it, because we're just scratching the surface here, and there's so much more that is possible, and also beyond just grape growing. Just had a guy
Yeah.
visiting here from Israel. He'd heard, I think it was either the Green Cover or the Regenerative Ag podcast, and he came here because he was visiting the country. He was actually a cotton breeder, and we just brainstorm on ideas of taking this to other crops and the potential. And again, the overarching thing is how do we restore our ecosystems? Because we've got a lot of farmland out there, and if we can increase biodiversity on our farmland, well, actually, it's not an if thing. We have to increase biodiversity on our agricultural lands, or we're just going to be swirling down the toilet here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I mean, you offer internships, is that right? There's a big educational component to what you guys are doing.
We do, and that we're probably going to change that around a little bit and make it an apprenticeship program, um,
Apprenticeship,
and,
okay.
and try and go a little more in depth and attract people that are definitely going into ideally regenerative viticulture in some form, or it could be something closely related, but ideally attracting people so that we can train people to go out there and work with other folks and get the increase the rate of uptake.
Right. Yeah. That's really incredible. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. This is, I mean, really, really amazing stuff. I think it is where we have to head, and I think it's absolutely the future if we want to have a future. I mean, the sooner we can make it our present, the more likely we will be to have a future. And I just again want to reiterate like how you know how much I think it's just this idea of where you came from the very beginning of caring about these creatures in the natural world around you is something we can all just learn from. I mean, if you take nothing else away from everything else that you said, that's been immensely informative. That is the only. That's my. That's what I would love anybody to hear from you. So thank you so much for being that person and doing this work.
And thank you for what you're doing and getting information like this out there.
The sponsor for this episode is Centralis Wine. Centralis is an ecological winery that I started to protect or benefit the environment and my community with every business and winemaking decision. I envision a wine world in which humans are the students and servants of the non-human world, regenerating and protecting the vitality of ecosystems and promoting the diversity of life through wines that uniquely and deliciously reflect local abundance. Centralis wines feature foraged prickly pears, urban perennial polyculture wine garden produced grapes and other fruit, gleanings from urban fruit trees, dry farmed century-old vines, and organic and biodynamic viticulture. If this sounds interesting to you, join our email list or wine club at centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com.